All right, so we might have people trickling in as the event goes on, but we're at 7:05, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. As I said in a comment just a little bit earlier, this is part 2 of a 2-part series on the crisis at Rikers Island. It's extremely meaningful to everybody on this panel today. I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Grace Ortez. I'm a community organizer, advocate, and most importantly, I'm a member of Freedom Agenda, with whom Dartmouth Prison Initiative is connecting on this event today. Everyone here, like I said, has a particular viewpoint, perspective, and experience that connects them to the crisis at hand today. Part of why we wanted to create this educational series of events was to educate the public about what's going on beyond the headlines, that are fear-mongering, that are meant to pit us against our community members, that are meant to make monsters out of humans and people who live with trauma, right? And Rikers Island is a relic, barbarian relic of a time and a mindset that as humans, I think we're all ready to leave behind, being people in a more mindful space about and more informed space about the ways that trauma persists in our communities, knowing that resources are what is truly necessary in order to prevent violence and in order to really keep us safe. People are having these broader conversations now about mass incarceration and the harm that it's done to Black and Brown lives. And we can only deconstruct that by learning how we got there and also what the future holds, without relying on jails and prisons as reactionary measures to address violence in the aftermath of the violence, right? I think we have to recognize that violence is preventable, but that can only happen when resources are moved away from institutions like incarceration that, like I said earlier, only serve as punitive responses. What we really need is restoration and transformation. And that's what we're here to talk about tonight. We have some phenomenal panelists that we're extremely fortunate and blessed to have the expertise and the power to tell you all about the crisis at hand, the movement that's been going on to close Rikers Island for many years, what is in our way, and where we're headed next. And I hope that they inspire you just as much as they inspire me every day. So I'm gonna let them have a little moment to introduce themselves and what brings them to this work, what they're up to, and what really connects them to the crisis at Rikers Island and that urge to shut it down for good. So I'm gonna go ahead and pass it along to Ana Pastoresa, our first panelist for the night. Hi, Anna.
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Anna Pastoressa. I am a leader in the Close Rikers campaign. I'm also a member of Freedom Agenda. The reason why I became a leader in the Close Rikers campaign is that my son was arrested and thrown into Rikers Island for 6 years, waiting for trial, with no discovery, no bail, and no speedy trial. I became enraged, upset. I had all the feelings within myself, and I thought that I needed to do something about it, because I was shocked that in this country, in New York, you can actually put somebody in jail waiting for trial for 6 years and being subjected to abuse, mental, physical abuse, torture, all sorts of inhumanity that I didn't believe it could happen in this country. And that's why I'm here today, you know, with the Close Rikers campaign. And I am very, very upset to see that, you know, we started this campaign in 2016. The first day was a cold day in March of 2016, when we organized a big rally in front of City Hall, New York City, Manhattan. And we demanded to close Rikers. And now it's 6 years later. And I am still at it. My son is not even there anymore, but I am continuing this fight. I can
Thank
pass
you,
it on
Anna.
to somebody else. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We speak for everyone when I say that we're beyond fortunate for all the contributions that you've made and just in your strength and power to be able to talk about this and insist that, you know, not only your son be saved, but everybody's sons, daughters, loved ones not go through the same situation. And through your advocacy, you're really saving so many mothers the same heartache that you had to endure. So we need to make space for that gratitude for who you are and your contributions, because that's very real. Next, I'm going to pass it on to Melissa Eichen. Welcome.
Thank you, Grace. My name is Melissa Yashan. I, too, joined the movement to Close Rikers in early 2016. I came to the movement as a partner with New York Lawyer for the Public Interest, where I was working. My background was in police and criminal justice reform, but I was working at New York Lawyers for the Public Interest in the environmental justice program. And from shifting from criminal justice reform to environmental justice, I really was able to see how intersectional both of those movements are and should be, and brought the environmental justice lens to the Close Rikers movement. And we were the only environmental organization participating as a partner in the Close Rikers movement, and felt a responsibility to speak up about the environmental conditions and hazards that really truly pose human rights violations on Rikers Island, and make it really reveal the toxicity of the place, even beyond the human inflicted horrors that occur there. And so through that, I have had the total honor of working with the magnificent other panelists today for 6 years almost now. And we have victories, we have a lot of challenges, and we'll talk a little bit more about what I think is one of the proudest accomplishments we've done, which is really, for the first time, bring the environmental and criminal justice reform movements together, to really find a new power and advocate and really demonstrate what happens when you can bring activists together and not just work in a vacuum any longer. So thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation.
Thank you, Melissa. And I really appreciate you, again, you as well, your advocacy. And I appreciate you naming that bridge that exists there. That's a big part of, you know, why we're doing these like broad educational moments for people who maybe are interested or experiencing other social justice issues, to tell them that, like you said, that everything is intersectional. As the quote says, we don't live single issue lives. So we all need to come together in our strengths. Obviously, there will always be like, you know, very focused justice reform oriented organizers, right? But we need all kinds of allies, because there's a lot of different ways that our movements can come together and be more powerful. So thank you. And I hope that that encourages and inspires people in the audience today. Next, I'm going to pass it to my good friend, Marco Barrios. Welcome, Marco.
I changed my name to Marco Antonio Barrios. Someone told me to mention the whole name on there, right? Good evening, everyone. It's Marco Antonio Barrios Salinas, I like to say. I started the movement in 2017 after coming home, after doing 24 years and 6 months. I'm a disabled veteran. I was diagnosed with PTSD, which was never treated during my incarceration, but thank God I learned coping skills, read many books, and got a degree in behavioral sciences, which helped me also with my coping skills. I'm currently a criminal justice advocate with the Urban Justice Center Mental Health Project. The line of work I do is I monitor the discharge planning services on the Brad H. Class action lawsuit for those individuals with mental health challenges, especially severe mental health. Um, I decided from day one when I was in there that I had to change, and I had to make a change, not just for me, but for the society, how we treat people, especially with mental health conditions. I was part of the Renewable Rikers, I think with one of the council members and Melissa. Environment is very important as well because we only have one planet, one home. We destroy that, and the whole thing behind the Renewable Rikers, which Melissa will talk about, is those communities that have been infected by water treatment plants and peaker plants. And so we found the perfect spot for that because Rikers is uninhabitable and we still got people there. I'm also part of the member of Freedom Agenda and other coalitions like Treatment Not Jails. And, we all got to make a change. If I leave something behind, I have a daughter, so I definitely want to leave this world much better than it is right now. And I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. I'm really glad that you're here too. And we're, again, very fortunate for your survival and persistence. And I think that voice that you bring, and not only that, but you choose to do the work that you do, which is like very much working with people currently suffering, right? And those are the voices that we need to elevate so people know how real this crisis is. So thank you again. And I really look forward to hearing from you. I'm going to pass it on to another good friend of mine and co-director of Freedom Agenda, Darren Mack. Hi, Darren.
Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. A little bit about myself and what connects me to the topic of Close Rikers. So at the age of 17, I was arrested, charged as an adult, and sent to Rikers Island when the population was over 21,000 people detained there. During that time, Rikers Island was out of sight, out of mind, and basically permitted to be managed, through dehumanization, terror, and brutality. So, ultimately, after serving almost, approximately 20 years in New York State prison system, I came home, and in 2015, there was a young man by the name of Khalif Browder, 16 years old, was arrested for stealing a backpack, $70 backpack, and he spent 3 years on Rikers Island, 2 of those years of solitary confinement. And, and they just basically, they wanted him to plead guilty, but he didn't do it. So he spent all those years on Rikers Island like Anna's son. And, eventually he was released, the charges was dropped. And he spoke out about, what was happening there, what happened to him and what's happening to the people there. And, because of the trauma that he went through, he took his own life. And, when that happened, that's like, I couldn't believe it. It was like, I couldn't believe that the same thing that was happening on Rikers Island when I was there almost 2 decades ago was continuing to happen. And people were being dehumanized and continuing to be brutalized. And this was the city was allowed us to go on. So in 2016, when the call to Close Rikers, emerged, I got directly involved. I got directly involved. So, so today, with Freedom Agenda, I'm a co-director of Freedom Agenda, which took the baton to carry on the work, with our partners and allies to move forward with, with the movement and the plan to push forward and advance and strengthen the plan to close Rikers Island. So that's how I got engaged and connected to the work.
Thank you, Darren. And again, thank you, everybody. We're all super lucky to have you. And I know y'all, but even I'm excited to hear what you have to say today. I think it'll be really dope. I want to, before we get into the substance of why we're here, I want to tell you guys a little bit more about Freedom Agenda, which you heard most of us are members in this room. Freedom Agenda is a member-led organization that has really been at the forefront of the movement to close Rikers Island. And we're special for a lot of different reasons. We are led by a membership that is directly impacted. So our membership is consisted of people who have experienced directly the trauma of incarceration. And they have that lived experience that can't be substituted with anything else, right? The stories, the trauma, the pain, and people who have experienced the brutality of a system are best informed to know the solutions that we should put forward to end that brutality. So part of what we're doing in this discussion is, and that I hope that all of you take away as students, wherever you are, whatever you do, is learning and understanding that we need to center directly impacted voices first and foremost. So Freedom Agenda does that. Like I said, directly impacted and member-led. And we are fighting so hard to close at Rikers Island right now. We just had an event on Monday in which we had action right outside of the gates of Rikers Island, and we're making all this noise with other fellow community organizations, right? And that was in response to the crisis that has emerged last year, right? Rikers Island has been a brutal place, notoriously for generations. But in 2021 alone, there are 15 deaths. And for those who aren't familiar, which is okay, there's no shame in not knowing things. We all start our educational journey somewhere, right? Rikers Island, the majority of those held inside haven't even had their fair day in court, right? So a death in a jail or prison, there's no justification for that. It's not necessary. But to know that that's the situation of most of the people at the overwhelming majority of people at Rikers Island adds a layer of injustice that we need to do something about. The day before our rally on Monday, there was the first death of a community member who was someone at Rikers for this year. So we're really activated, and we hope that you leave this panel feeling the same way. In the chat, I'm going to drop in. This is a very no commitment form that I'd like everybody to go ahead and fill out when you have a moment. You can just click that, open it for later. Like I said, it's no commitment. It's just kind of, if you're curious, if you want to learn more about what you can do, even if you're not directly impacted, but you're like, hey, like I care about this, I want to know how to do more. That's going to be your starting point. There's information there as well about how to connect with Freedom Agenda over social media. Because again, if you're super busy, but the best you can do is, follow us and share our tweets, then you're playing a role in introducing our work into your network. And that's very meaningful. So go ahead and, check that out. I'm gonna, passive aggressively put that link in the chat a couple times during our event tonight. So I hope you'll take the hint at some point. So that's that for now. Let's move us into our discussion, which I'm really excited for. So my first question, I think is very central to what we're here for, and we'll set us up to understand, again, where the movement to close Rikers Island is now, its challenges and where it's emerging to and what comes next. I was hoping our panelists could tell us a little bit more about how the movement to close Rikers emerged and where it stands as we speak right now.
Yeah, I could share a little bit, and then folks could weigh in. So basically, like as I mentioned, Freedom Agenda is relatively a new organization. We launched in October of 2020. But however, our staff, our members, have been engaged in the movement to close Rikers for years. And, the discussion about closing Rikers goes back actually decades. One prime example, there were efforts in the past, made by the late, great Herb Sturz, who was a co-founder of the Vera Institute. At the time, he was at the deputy mayor for criminal Justice in the Koch administration in the late 1970s. He, proposed that we needed to shut down Rikers. It was a crisis then. But that was met with a lot of vitriol, fear mongering, and reactionary punishment paradigm backlash, and obviously those efforts were defeated. And those efforts in the past was always a top-down effort from citizen stakeholders. But in 2016, for the very first time, it was a bottom-up grassroots movement, of survivors of Rikers Island, their family members and allies, built a coalition that was so broad that it changed the hearts and minds of New Yorkers to understand that Rikers cannot be fixed, that Rikers cannot be reformed, that the only solution for what I always call the last penal colony in the US is closure. So, yeah, so I'll stop there, and Anna and Marco and Melissa, can weigh in. So that's kind of like a summary history.
Yes, I can continue because I was there and Darren was there. That's how I met Darren, on the day that we went to City Hall and we spoke up. I was terrified because I had never spoken in public. I was suffering. That was the 6th year that my son was still on Rikers Island. And right before we went to City Hall, I remember my son had a court date. He had court dates for 6 years, and they kept postponing and these court dates. So nothing was ever being resolved. And I remember that the day that I saw him in court, like it was a couple of weeks before we went to City Hall, my son showed up in court completely beaten up. He had a black eye, he had cuts on his face, and the judge, his defense attorney, the DA, they were not even noticing anything different about him. They thought it was okay. It was just another inmate or criminal, whatever they were thinking. They didn't even notice that he had cuts, bruises, black eye, and they expected him to sit there for hours for them being told that the case was being adjourned. And that had gone on for 6 years. And that's why I was so enraged. I had so many feelings and inside of me, because I also felt abused myself as his mother, and also as a person who had gone for 6 years every week to visit my son. So I witnessed not only the abuse done to my son, but I witnessed as a visitor abuse being inflicted in my eyes right there, to visitors, to incarcerated people. I've seen fights. I've seen Department of Correction officers beating up people in front of my eyes. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I've seen some real atrocity, and I thought this is probably just the tip of the iceberg because I'm a visitor. So what I'm seeing is shocking. I am undergoing abuse myself because the officers, and when you go there, you're not treated with any respect. You're just cattle. They throw you around just like cattle, really, and they push you against the wall. They make you get sniffed by dogs, you name it. They put you through they strip and search you. They squeeze your breasts. They put their hands in your hair if you have a lot of hair to see if you have drugs. They put you through a lot of disrespectful and undignifying searches for no reason. And so when I was seeing him being abused that way and seeing my son being abused, other incarcerated people being abused, I thought, imagine, I'm a visitor, so I'm only seeing a little tip of the iceberg. What goes on in there that we don't see, it's a lot more. But I also heard it through the phone when I was on the phone with my son many times. Over 6 years, you can imagine how many times I spoke on the phone with him and how many times I've heard fights. While I'm talking to my son on the phone, I would hear screaming and yelling in the background, to the point that at times my son would have to hang up the phone because he said, it's getting crazy. I have to go. And he would slam the phone down because he would have to go and take shelter or try to avoid being rearrested, because if something happens in Rikers Island, you can get rearrested while you are already in there. And let me tell you, my son was there for 6 years with many hundreds and hundreds of people who were waiting for trial. Just in one building, there's other buildings. Most of the buildings are occupied by people who are waiting for trial, which is unconscionable and unbelievable for me. As an immigrant to this country and becoming naturalized US citizen, I swore on the flag. I believe in the US Constitution. I learned the US Constitution because I had to take a test to become a citizen of the United States. So I had to study and take a test to become naturalized American US citizen. And so I knew about speedy trial, and I couldn't understand why my son, a US citizen, was being treated that way and not being heard in court for 6 years. And on top of that, abuse. I mean, he came home completely PTSD, abuse, you name it, everything. So he had to go to counseling because he was a mess. I was a mess too, but of course, it was a lot worse for him. He was in as well many times. They don't call it that way. They give it different words, different terms, so that you don't really know that they're in solitary confinement, but they're there in solitary confinement. So when you come out of solitary confinement, where you don't get enough water to drink, where you don't get enough food, where you don't get to bathe, where you don't get to use the bathroom, it's tough. It's really tough. It's unimaginable, but that's what goes on there.
Thank you for that point of view, Anna. And that's exactly what they keep hidden very intentionally, because it's people who are, have so much faith in what this country is, would not believe the torture. And let's call it for what it is torture that goes on in Rikers Island, which again, they shut off and they put people away from sight, so that, we are made to believe that keeps us safe, and all it's doing is perpetuating an intense amount of harm that eventually goes out into our communities and resolves absolutely nothing. So thank you for giving voice to that experience, and I'm so sorry that you had to live through that at all. Marco, I want to turn it to you, if you want to tell us a little bit about your point of view from how the Close Rikers campaign emerged, as I know you've been a longtime member as well, and where we're at today.
So prior to my arrest, I was in the military a year before, actually. In 91, I was in Desert Storm. I worked in a POW camp. The conditions there were much better than actual Rikers Island. When I got arrested, it was in Buffalo. So I never had been in Rikers. In 99, in 2000, I went to Rikers for family court for visitation rights for my daughter. And I spent 3 weeks each time. But each time I went there, I was dying to go back to a maximum security prison, which was Sing Sing. And I mean, for someone that wants to go back to a maximum security prison, you can imagine the conditions of Rikers. The whole structure, Rikers is pretty old. And just, there's no heat, there's no air conditioning. The way it's structured, and I mean, I can't explain in words. It's like almost going to a zoo and watching animals there. Because the way it's structured, the movement, there's no programming. People go straight to the day room, spend all day there. There's got to be some activities other than going to the yard and recreation. The phone system, they give you like 2 phones. They do that on purpose because why? There's so many people in Rikers with 2 phones. So they get into fights, and the officers watch you fight. After somebody gets cut or beat up, then they come in. The food is horrible. The officers, if you have a mental breakdown, they take forever to see someone. The services is not there. So you imagine right now, that was then. Now with this crisis, pandemic, and also the staff, the lack of staff there because they don't want to come to work. Can you imagine on the conditions there? Last year, 15 people died, was murdered, I should say. And this year, just about a week ago, 1 person died. So that's 16 people. You can't tell me, the clients I have always are telling me what the conditions are. And I've had people saying, I put a referral to see I have suicidal ideation. I need to see someone. And I put in a referral. I haven't heard from no one in 2 weeks. How is that possible? Or they have a medical condition, like an asthma pump, and they can't get an asthma pump. Why? So right now it's getting even far worse than it was before. And, we was there on last week in front of Rikers to actually demand that it be closed immediately, not in 227. Unfortunately, right now, because of the pandemic, it was supposed to be closed in 2026. And the previous administration said 2027, but people continue to die. And the suffering in there, it's, I can understand why people lose hope. I mean, when you treat your own people, I feel a little bit ashamed that in America, we always talk about other countries being so civilized, when we have more people locked up in jail than any other country. And Rikers Island, what I don't know if some of you know, when it was first, when they inhabited, it was like 90 acres. Now it's over 400 because that's landfill. Most of that landfill. And the smell there, like, especially if you live there, the smell is constantly bombarded. You smell the water waste and the birds all flying around. It's just terrible. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, I guess I could add on just one piece about to the question, where we at now. So, through our advocacy and organizing, we pushed the city to adopt a plan to close all 10 jails on Rikers and the boat. There's actually literally jail facility that's a boat, which is adjacent to the Bronx. So the plan that we survivors of Rikers and family members and allies have won was to close all 10 jails on Rikers Island and the boat and address conditions of confinement by replacing the decrepit, deteriorating of jails that's currently in the cities, because all across the country, the jail is next to the court. And we have that in New York City as well, in Manhattan and Brooklyn and Queens. The jail is next to the court. But those facilities are decrepit, deteriorating, lack of adequate heating system, air conditioner, light, so many problems with it. Like every summer we would protest in front of the Brooklyn jail facility because we would get complaints from people that, they're overheating because there's no central air and air system in there. And the same thing in the wintertime, protesting because of the lack of adequate heating system. So replacing, the current existing deteriorating facilities in the Bronx, Brooklyn, and Queens, and then establishing one in Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Queens, and establishing one in the Bronx. And so we're going from 14 jails across the city down to 4 by 2027. So that's from over 14,000 beds down to a maximum of 3,300, 75% decarceration. And we could move, and we could do even more. We could even decarcerate even further. So that's one of the things that we've been collaborating with other organizational partners. Like we had an action this week, calling for immediate decarceration now. And that's how, that's where we at in regards to, the plan to close Rikers.
And I want to add just also a piece to that. So back when bail reform was passed, we had the numbers go down to like 3,000 plus. And then there was that false narrative about bail reform being no good, and the rollbacks occurred, and then the pandemic occurred. So the numbers went up now a little bit, but not as much before, the decision to close Rikers. You're going to hear false information about how to keep the city safe and all these reforms not really working, but that's not true. We have to debunk the narrative that we have to keep locking people up, because most people come home. Most people go back to the same communities. And if we put people into, especially those with severe mental illness, to re-traumatize them, what do you expect for them to do when they come out? So I know it works, the reforms works, and we could decarcerate even further where we have a better, a humane conditions for those who have to be detained.
Thank you, everyone, for, again, those insights and that view of Rikers that people don't see, and that it's very intentional that we don't see them, right? And it's very, easy to get driven by the headlines that are, the trauma and pain and violence is very real, right? We're not diminishing that. No one's trying to do that. How I come to this work is as a violent survivor, and knowing that people who commit harm are often people who struggle with mental illness and or have a history of trauma themselves. We really just replicate the behaviors that either we see growing up or that the harms that are done to us. And if there aren't community resources that are able to transmute that pain and prevent people from turning that harm into something that harms other people, then it's inevitable that there will be transgressions in the community, right? So what we can do is not send people somewhere that will leave them worse, exponentially worse off. As you heard Marco talk about the ways that people aren't even getting their medical needs met, the fights that are happening in there. And there have been so many reports recently about what's going on right now, about incarcerated people being pitted against each other for entertainment, like gladiator style, right? If someone's already struggling, if they've ended up at Rikers because of a mental health crisis, because of a moment of violence, and we subject them to more violence and brutality, and they eventually end up back into their community, like, we're not doing that community any service, right? And that's what we're really here for people to understand, that a restorative transformation is what will really save our communities and keep us safe, and protect Black and Brown lives. So again, thank you to everybody for speaking on different elements of that question. I want to direct this one to Darren, but again, I want others to go ahead and join if you have something to add to it. But I wanted to see if you could tell us more about what is currently impeding the closure of Rikers Island.
Yeah, so one word: decarceration. That's what we need to do. Unfortunately, there's been, like it was mentioned, about the fear mongering, about bail reform, or the fear mongering, about crime in the media, and we know that if it bleeds, it leads. So so those things have contributed to the blocking decarceration efforts in New York City. In the pandemic, that's another thing. Courts were closed during the pandemic, so that if you was incarcerated and you weren't getting to court to have your day in court, and so since then there's been a backlog because courts was closed for so long. So yeah, it was a combination of factors that, that it contributed to the rise in the population in New York City jail system, the lack of, and then there's like the lack of transparency and accountability, with, people who basically staff Rikers Island, not coming to work to do their jobs, to take people to court, to get people the medical care that they need. So all those things contributed to the crisis, and what's been and that's kind of slowing down decarceration. And that's one of the things that we kind of focus on is we decarcerated effectively and safely in the past. As Marco mentioned, the population went from a little under 6,000 to 3,800 in like 2 months with bail reform and COVID releases. People who most vulnerable to COVID and dying from COVID, there was releases, and we need to continue. Right now, the population is about 5,500 people on Rikers Island, and about 200 of them are women. And there's a plan for our partners, WCJA, the Women's Community Justice Association, a plan to decarcerate the women. That can be done within this year. We can get those women off of Rikers Island this year, and there's a plan for that. So what's been impeding it, basically the lack of political will by this current administration, working with prosecutors and DAs and prosecutors and judges to, put in not bails, because by law, a judge is supposed to assess the person's ability to pay bail and set that. But what's been happening, they've been setting bails that people cannot pay. And so therefore, I say that it's no longer considered a bail, it's a ransom. It's a ransom because the majority of people on Rikers Island are Black or brown, come from low-income communities, working class communities, and who has $100,000 to pay a bail. Even for some folks, if you're 19, 20, 21 years old, where are you going to get $1,000 from? Even that is a burden. It might as well be $100,000. So that, those excessive bails being set on people, the congestion in the courts, are just some of the things that's been impeding decarceration. And that's what we've been calling for. And we have a plan where we could decarcerate safely to even less than 3,300, which the city is supposed to, move forward with the plan to close Rikers with. So, yeah.
Well, I wanted to say that also that Rikers Island has been filled with people with mental illnesses, homeless people. So a lot of those people don't belong on Rikers Island. They're just people who have been criminalized because they don't have any money and they don't have any shelter, they don't have any place to go, and they get picked up or arrested off the street and maybe homeless. So we need programs. And what upsets me the most is that the reason why this jail, Rikers Island, a lot of the jails in New York are filled with Black minorities, people, immigrants, working class people, is that some of them need help, need rehabilitation. Maybe they are addicted to some drugs. But when fentanyl or those expensive drugs came around, then they were seen by the public as, oh, this is a crisis, and these people need to be helped, and they need to go to treatment, they need to go to the hospital. But they don't see that when a Black person or a minority person gets arrested for being addicted to some drug, oh, he's a criminal. So we have to start also with a mind of decriminalizing homeless people, mentally ill people, people that are addicted on drugs. They're not criminals. So if we don't have programs to funnel them through specific programs and help them, it is going to be a vicious cycle. Just arrest them and throw them in jail, arrest them and throw them on Rikers Island. And Rikers Island is so convenient. It's an island tucked away from everyone. And so you don't know what's going on there. But a lot of the people don't belong there. They don't. They just become worse. They get more stress. They get more abuse. And then it's really hard to fix them when they come out. They shouldn't have been there in the first place. A lot of those people, they shouldn't be there.
Yes.
They don't belong there.
I
Thank
could
you,
just
Anna.
very quickly on that
Definitely.
topic. Something we haven't talked about is when we began the Close Rikers movement and began to gain steam. We were not just talking about closing Rikers. We were talking about closing Rikers and building community. And that was as important a part of this movement as closing Rikers. In an ideal world, you would build community, and that would be the precursor to closing Rikers because all of the resources would be there, and that would organically, naturally decarcerate enough to be able to close Rikers. The world we live in is incredibly political. And as Darren said, a huge reason we still haven't seen Rikers close is a lack of political will to decarcerate, but there's a lack of political courage. There's a lack of political courage to admit, to allow the public to see, to allow it to be a part of public dialogue, what has happened on Rikers, what continues to happen on Rikers. And I think, I sometimes think about if there were a horrible fire on Rikers and all of the buildings burned, the city would have no choice but to find some way and something to do in order to house people who are remanded, in order to keep them in custody, because at the end of the day, we all can be abolitionists, but until people are not being arrested and DAs and judges aren't remanding people, we need somewhere to house them, and we want them to be housed in a humane way. And so if there were some sort of other crisis other than COVID and the climate crisis, which are crises that caused these buildings to truly not be habitable, the city would find a way. And you know what? These buildings aren't habitable. This island is built on a toxic landfill that is deteriorating. The buildings themselves are subsiding. There is no adequate plumbing and sewage and access to clean water, which was an issue before the pandemic. And with the pandemic, even more of an issue. So it is a sense of urgency, which anybody honest who is elected to be a city or state official would have to have the political courage to really speak truth to what is happening on Rikers and allow people to see it, and hope that that courage would pay off in expediting the closure of Rikers and finding a way to make it work, to find humane, smaller in the community places to remand people, which I hope helps take us to the next subject. But I just wanted to really build off of what Darren said about political will. And it's really more than just will. And where there is a will, there's a way, but it's really about courage.
I was going to say the same. Melissa said it better than I. No, it's not having a backbone, but also being afraid of those stakeholders that want that industrial complex to continue, that same system. You constantly hear them saying, no, lock them up, instead of finding the solution, preventing crime from occurring, like Melissa and Darren has said, investing into the communities, in order to prevent and in cases intervene without people having to go into jail and finding treatment. And also the reentry programs. Why are we not having enough reentry programs? So people continue that recidivism, just to feed the beast.
Precisely. Thank you, everybody. I think you all, again, offered a piece of context for something really like multidimensional and just like horrid, that we have more power than we think to ensure the closure of. I appreciate the note of calling out bail for what it is. It is ransom. If it was about public safety, then it wouldn't be based on something monetary that excludes a big portion of our society, right? So that just shows like an internal worked in bias, that again, it's like layers of injustice. I also wanted to say real quick, I've heard that we have some people tuning in from the YouTube stream also some students who are like watching in a room, streaming this on a projector. That is like really cool. So like, hey, what's up? I also wanted to, I forgot to say earlier, I wanted to invite everybody to go ahead and use the Q&A function. If you have questions for our panelists, I'll make sure that we have space at the end to address those. So thank you for all the engagement. Let's move on to the next question. And I'm going to put in the chat again, just one more time, in case you're inclined. Information about how to get on our newsletter and engage with us. Because again, that political piece is very important, right? Applying pressure to politicians and putting this at the forefront of what they think about and what they're concerned about, and activate them to take action. And that's something that even if you're not fully immersed in this work, you can help us. Just being another person, tweeting something at them, calling them, sending them an email. So this is very much something in which you can be all hands on deck. And that doesn't take a lot of experience. So thank you again for all those contributions. I have a question for Marco that I think is going to answer a lot of concerns and questions that people have. What will closing Rikers and implementing the borough-based facility plan look like? And will this cost more money to the taxpayers?
I could spend 8 hours on that one, how I envision, we all envision Rikers Island closing and the borough-based facilities is not having little mini Rikers Island in each borough. And what I mean by that, like 2.5 years ago, before the pandemic, the former mayor had a task force, and it was set up in 3 different groups. I was part of the program subcommittee for programming, and then there was one for structure and one to sort of retrain the officers, correctional officers, right? Why that's important for all 3 of them is because structure means a lot. If we want to get away from a punitive model to a rehabilitative model. If people have to be detained, then the structure is important because of movement, of programming, and also community-based involvement in each of these borough-based facilities. Now, I know there's people that fears that, oh, we're just creating new jails. Well, it's my understanding, we had 14 at one point. If we get down to 4, I don't think that's building new jails. We're creating more humane detention centers where there's more community-based involvement, and we get rid of the punitive model and implement a rehabilitative model. I know when we made recommendations, it was all based on rehabilitation. How are we gonna rehabilitate the person from the moment they go into a facility and after they leave the facility. Unfortunately, the pandemic came and we didn't hear no more about that, but I heard news today that there is a letter circulating about those recommendations. The cost, well, before I go on to the cost, when we sat there and we talked about the structure, about the programming, and then having actually staff that is going to work towards rehabilitation and not, torture people, abuse people, then we could see a decarceration where we get to the point of there won't, hopefully in my lifetime, maybe, there won't be no jails. But it got to be a starting point. I know somebody mentioned that in the question, in the chat about, being about I can never pronounce that.
Abolitionist.
And so I'm also an abolitionist. But there's a way, there's a plan for that, right? As long as we decarcerate and take those fundings away from DOC and NYPD, we can put that money, allocate that money back into the communities. The cost right now, when we was in the middle of, the mayor and the community talking about building the borough-based facilities, people that opposed the new borough-based facilities talked about cost. Right now, if we built the facilities, it would cost like maybe $9-10 billion. One shot deal. Right now, keeping Rikers Island open and the borough-based facilities, annually, you're spending billions of dollars. Somewhere about, I don't know, 14, somebody could correct me there, $14 billion annually. But if we're building these borough-based facilities, all you're doing is building it, that's it. And you actually, it's gonna be more cost effective because we're gonna have that population growing smaller and smaller. We're gonna have less people going in because they're gonna get the proper treatment they need. And hopefully other reforms that will not put people incarcerated, like Anna said, for having a severe mental illness. So I see more cost effective. Others will say, well, no, you're building more jails. It's costing a lot of more money. In fact, the city has $8 billion set aside for that. I'm sure it's going to cost more because of inflation, but it's only one shot deal. So I don't see,
That's what I was going to say,
Huh?
Marco, is that the city had capital funding in their budget to build new facilities on Rikers or refurbish the existing ones. They've had that for at least 6 years. And then when the city committed to closing Rikers, that's just stayed there. So there's actually already money that's been earmarked. And it's, I think that is a non-starter conversation, and it's a distraction more than anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, for folks who say, what's the cost? What's the cost of a human life? 16 people had lost their lives within the last year in the Department of Corrections custody. We spend more money, like I mentioned earlier, New York City DOC, Department of Corrections, has the highest city budget in the country. LA County have 3 times as many people within their Department of Corrections system and operate on half of the budget that New York City operates on. We spend more money and get the worst results. So the cost is not even, like Melissa said, is a non-issue. And as Marco mentioned, we're going to be saving not only your lives, but saving money if people are so concerned about, about the fiscal, cost. We're going to be saving money, billions every single year to be redistributed. And we have to fight for it. It's going to be redistributed back into, those communities that have been historically under-resourced.
I'm also going to make sure, well, not I, but us, we're going to make sure that there's some oversight in each of these borough-based facilities. And that's what's needed, the transparency someone mentioned earlier, the oversight, because we want to make sure that there's no violations occurring and people are treated with dignity, and hopefully that the programs are effective. One of the things I learned, in all those years, prison has been the #1 facility for supposedly treating mental health. It's the biggest in the country, prisons and jails. And I can tell you, Ron, from experience, the treatment in prisons and jails is inadequate. I mean, that's a whole different topic. I could tell you about how they deal with treatment in there. It's just like one shoe fits all. And that's why you see people coming out even worse than they went in.
Well, you cannot treat people in a dungeon. If you are mentally ill, or if you are, you need rehabilitation or anything, you can't just criminalize the person, throw them in a dungeon like Rikers Island, give them medication, and then expect them to get better. That's not even good enough for a person to work there. Rikers Island I've witnessed it with my eyes in the visit room. The visit room in wintertime, and when it rained or the snow was melting, would leaks. And then you see the incarcerated people walking with buckets and placing buckets where the roof is leaking. That came with mold. That came with problems breathing air, besides the stench that is there constantly. On top of that, you got the mold growing because of all the leaks. And this is like the visit room. You can barely breathe in there. Imagine now in a cell when you're closed off and you cannot even open the window or the door. So I don't even understand how labor unions allow employees to work in such environment. They wouldn't allow it anywhere else. There would be a riot if let's say, City Hall had that kind of environment, or any other government building run that way. How can you have leaks everywhere? How can you have pieces of roof, of ceiling falling off, peeling paint? There is asbestos there. There is lead paint peeling. It's mold. It's madness. So, okay, maybe people don't care about incarcerated people. You hate them, they're criminals. Let's say that. Agree. But how about the people who work there, the nurses? How about, Department of Corrections working in there? How about doctors and civilians who work there? Why should they work in such environment?
Well,
Nobody
Anna,
gets
there's
better.
one thing
Nobody
about
can
they
get
bring their
better or
water.
healed. Huh?
They bring
What
their
did you say?
water. They bring water bottles, so they know that water is not good. Melissa mentioned about it, and we drink that water when we were in there. But they bring their own water bottles. That tells you a lot that water is
Yeah.
not safe.
Yeah, but then the air is not safe either. What you're breathing in there is not safe.
Mm-mm.
And that's why people die there. And you can bake in a cell in summertime because there is no ventilation. Now, these in our regular world in New York City, they would be called housing violations. They would be building violations. But over there, that's anything goes. It's okay. You can live like that. No, you can't live like that. You cannot work in that kind of environment. That's why Rikers Island has to go. It's not a safe environment for anyone.
That's right. Thank you all again. I think what we're really talking about is sustainable abolition as decarceration. And I think that I know that this is what makes the voices of directly impacted people the most important ones on this issue, because we can talk numbers all day and night, but again, we cannot put a price on a human life, period. And the conditions that people are living in right now, we're not a community. Freedom Agenda is not a community of people looking from the outside in. We're comprised of people currently struggling because of what's going on at Rikers Island, and who have historically struggled because of Rikers Island. So they can tell us exactly what that's like on the inside. Speaking on ecology and everything, I think the boat is a really good example, which the boat was touched on earlier by Darren, and it's docked right off of Hunts Point, and is a symbol of ecological racism, because the South Bronx in itself and the people in it are victimized by that. And Hunts Point in particular, where the boat is, it's like this massive barge that looks like shipping containers stacked on top of each other with no windows. So people are deprived of anything natural, and even, the light and the hope that light represents in our day. It really takes people out of the presence of humanity. And like someone, I think Melissa put in the chat earlier, conditions matter. And that's why we're here, and that's why we present the plan that we have. The next question is for Anna, and I also welcome others to add to this. What makes a borough-based facility plan more effective at leading us to decarceration, as opposed to a plan to build new jails? And kind of wrapped in there, why not renovate buildings on Rikers instead of closing the whole island?
Well, it's beyond. Rikers Island is beyond fixing it or renovating it. It's just the land is toxic. The stench is there. I mean, this is a real serious environmental issue that is going on there. And the stench is smelled all the way to Queens, the borough of Queens. You can smell it even before you get to Rikers Island. It's like you're in a sewage, pretty much. That's what it smells like as soon as you arrive, even before you cross the bridge. So, and what I've seen with my eyes for 6 years, it's unbelievable. I mean, I work in real estate, so I know all about, that's why I was mentioning violations, Department of Building violations, environmental violations. I mean, in the real world in New York City, you cannot live in a residential building that leaks or that has those kind of violations that are occurring over there. But nobody's looking at that, and so they think it can be renovated. No, you cannot renovate something on a toxic land. It needs to be shut down. It's beyond renovation. That's why I can't even imagine. No, that place needs to be shut down and turned into what is not now, like into an island of renewable energy, of something that we need in New York, because that area of New York City needs new sewage, new environmental, and new infrastructure. You can't just put a Band-Aid over and think it's okay. We renovated the building where you have a Band-Aid over a big wound. No, it needs to be shut down, and we need to have facilities near the courts, like everywhere else in the US. You have county jails usually are near the courts. Why do you put them tucked away? Do you know how much it costs to even transport incarcerated people every day from Rikers Island to the courts? No, you need to have them near the courts. And they need to be nice buildings where you can have air to breathe, circulation of air, and where there is no violations for the people who have to live there every day, day and night, because they're incarcerated, and for the people who go to work there every day, for the attorneys who can go and visit there and talk to their clients who are incarcerated. Attorneys don't like to go to Rikers Island. They don't go to Rikers Island. In 6 years, my son, 4 different attorneys never went to visit my son on Rikers Island. They couldn't go there. Now, if it was near the jail, near the court, they would have gone because it's more accessible. And if it's a better environment, that's even better. So we need to put people in a nicer environment in order to heal. And they shouldn't be, I disagree when we're calling them jails. We should have buildings that are for healing. And like they call them in some civilized country in Northern Europe, they call them retreats. They don't call them jails. I know it firsthand. I have friends who have been arrested in Switzerland, in Norway, in Germany. It was a whole different experience. They went to retreats. They went for rehabilitation. They were treated. One of them in Germany had a mental illness. It was treated. And he was so thankful to be in Germany and not in the US. My friend in Switzerland was so thankful when her son got arrested in Switzerland because he was sent to a mountain retreat to heal, to rehabilitate, and to remove the drugs from his body in a way. How can you heal people in dungeons? It doesn't happen. So Rikers Island needs to be shut down. There's no way it can be ever renovated. No.
That's
right.
Touch. Oh, I'm sorry. My dog is now going to be barking since I wanted to. Of course, he chooses now.
He wants to close Rikers too. Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, he's an activist. He's participated in our campaign. I just wanted to say, I think first of all, there are studies that show that when you are closer to your community, when you are locked up, whether you're being detained or you're serving time pre or post trial, right? When you are closer to your community, closer to your faith community, closer to your family, you are rehabilitated and recidivism goes down. So that is like a very basic, criminal justice 101 reason to have borough/community-based jails. These are not borough-based jails. These are so you can await trial close to your court, close to your lawyer, but close to your family, close to your rabbi, close to your imam, close to your preacher. That is one really, really big point that I want to make. Another one is that somebody put some comment in the chat that noted that Rikers Island is 413 acres. Rikers Island is 413 acres. Of that, only just between 65 and 80 of those acres are actually the original Rikers Island. The rest of that is garbage. The rest of that is landfill. And so to say that, oh, we should continue to house people because it is a big space. And where do we get that big space? That big space is really only good for polluting infrastructure, for noxious infrastructure. And that is what we're going to talk about in a little bit. But just because it's a big landmass doesn't mean that it's the right place to put people. Especially there's one bridge in and out. It is very difficult to get to. And as we've said again and again, that is why we have put Black and brown people there, out of sight, out of mind. And that is not okay. They're not second-class citizens. They deserve to stay in their communities.
I know someone else mentioned about skyscrapers. In Queens, we already have a building there that's not being even used. And when I went to one of the meetings, community board meetings there, during talking about borough-based facilities, someone said, well, it's going to be bigger than the skyscraper. I don't see that. I don't know how that came about. Like we all been saying, the structure is important when the person needs to be rehabilitated. And if we don't find Rikers, what community then will actually have a building? Everywhere we went, not everywhere. Some of the places we went was like not in our community. Well, your community is not alone. Your community is part of a whole of New York City. So what affects others, I don't understand how people say, well, not in my community, but I care about criminal justice reform. I don't get it. If you really care about people in general, no matter where they come from, their color, their creed, where they've been, what they've done, then you should be concerned about how they're treated and where they're going to be living at, their living conditions. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. The environment for healing, I think, is like the theme here, that we really want people to understand. And again, those firsthand experiences, in addition to like Melissa's incredible environmental justice advocacy, really helps us understand how we can create better conditions, not just for those who are inside, but like their families, and not perpetuate, again, in ecological racism. That's really what it is. And that's the cross-section between environmental justice and criminal justice, right? We're here. Rikers is kind of like this monolith, the symbolic monolith, that if we can really shut this down, figure this out, it would be an incredible model for the rest of the country and the world. And you heard Melissa say some really incredible, insightful things that I hope you'll remember and be able to use in the way that you speak to people about the crisis at Rikers and what can be done. And now I want to give her a little bit more time to talk about Renewable Rikers and how this trans-sectional vision was developed and where the plan stands as we speak right now. Thank you, Melissa, for, again, everything you shared so far was like really on point.
Gosh, thank you. This is just, it's the most important work I think I've ever done. And to be able to do it alongside people like Darren and Marco and Anna is just, just valuable to me. And I learn every time I get to participate in these conversations. And so with that, Anna, Marco, and Darren, I will talk, but please interrupt me because all of you have a lot of value to contribute here, as you all have been a part of Renewable Rikers from the beginning as well. So the Renewable Rikers vision came about, as we talked, I mentioned earlier that we weren't just working to close Rikers, we were talking about closing Rikers and building communities. And that's always been the core of the vision of Freedom Agenda and our partners. And as part of the Build Communities conversation, we hosted a health, wellness, and environmental justice subcommittee. And we thought about what we needed in communities to help treat people and divert people from ending up on Rikers. But we also started exploring our sort of dream vision board game. Okay, let's say we're able to close all of the jails and Rikers. What would we do with that space? That built environment that is so toxic and is the site of and source of so much trauma to so many people. what do we want to do with that? And it was a question we asked survivors and family members first, because that is whose vision and voice matters the most. And it was really insightful. And another Freedom Agenda member, Vidal, always was really powerful when he talked about this, how he remembers growing up in Harlem and growing up in the Bronx, and how he was able to recognize that his air quality was worse than other people's air quality, and that his view of like fossil fuel burning was very different than other communities' views. And he also recognized that there were more cops on the street, more kids getting stopped and frisked. And those two things aren't coincidental, right? So when we talk about the vision for Rikers, it is a vision of reparative justice and beginning to try to repair the harm done not just by Rikers, but by the racism in our city, in our policing and carceral state, but also in our built environment. Environmental injustice in New York City is rampant. Grace, you used the example of the boat in Hunts Point. Hunts Point and Mott Haven, that area of the South Bronx, is one of the most polluted areas in our city. It also is a community that disproportionately has a lot of its members sitting on Rikers right now. And so a vision in which we can address both of those things and begin to repair all of those harms together is one that was generated through these conversations with our Build Communities subcommittee, and very organically turned into the Renewable Rikers vision and plan, and now a coalition of about 40 or more groups and individuals that span, community activists, a large national environmental organizations, criminal justice reform groups, think tanks, community-based organizations. It runs the gamut, but it's really the first time you've seen criminal justice reform movement and the environmental movement come together and coalesce with a power and unity that I've never seen anything like. And it's through that power and unity that we were able to get the city to pass 3 pieces of legislation into law last year. And those 3 represent the Renewable Rikers Act, which was the culmination of this vision. The Renewable Rikers Act essentially requires the city of New York to undergo 2 feasibility studies to begin to get the ball rolling on converting the 413 acres into a renewable infrastructure hub. Now, why does that matter other than the whole climate justice, climate crisis piece of it? It matters because when you are able to close down antiquated, polluting, fossil fuel-based infrastructure that is sited in environmental justice communities, that cleans the air in those communities, it cleans the water, and it opens up acres of space that the communities have not had access to, and the communities should be entitled to decide how that space will be used. And a lot of that space is waterfront space. And we're talking about communities that have less than average access to green space and recreation. So this is why we kind of get like a little geeky in our excitement about this holistic vision, and the word transformative just feels not good enough to really encompass how big of an idea and exciting this is, especially as we see how critical the climate crisis has become to New York City. The irony of all of this is it wasn't until recently, and we're pretty far along in our planning for Renewable Rikers, that we saw the flood map of Rikers Island. The irony is it is not in a floodplain, whereas where all of our critical infrastructure is right now in the boroughs isn't a floodplain. So to put our battery storage for renewable energy storage on Rikers, which is uninhabitable for people, but hey, it's a great place to have, if we lose power from a storm, have our power be generated coming from there and be able to get us right back up and running. There are so many reasons this plan makes sense. It is a good green job generator. The vision incorporates providing job training and preference to people who are formerly incarcerated for the jobs that would be generated. And the specific uses that are being considered is a wastewater treatment plant, a cutting edge state-of-the-art wastewater treatment plant, which would allow 2 or 3 of the current aging wastewater treatment plants in Queens and the Bronx to close. It also would reduce pollution that goes into the East River. It is also a massive organic waste processing site is what we're envisioning, to divert a lot of the waste that we send to landfill where it emits greenhouse gases and instead have it be recycled and used for beneficial uses. The other benefit for communities is that our waste transfer stations currently are clustered in, you guessed it, the same low-income communities and communities of color in our city. And this would reduce the truck traffic in those communities. And then, of course, we envision some solar energy generation and battery storage. And the battery storage would allow the peaker plants, the fossil fuel spewing peaker plants that are, again, sited in our communities of color, to close and be removed, and that land be remediated to be used for other good, positive things for the community. So that is the Renewable Rikers vision. Where we are now, Darren, I've been talking a lot. Do you want to talk a little bit about where we are now?
No, I love it. Keep going. I might get too excited and mess up.
I mean, I'm happy to, it's very briefly. So the laws were passed and we've had a few deadlines go by. The first deadline was in July. The mayor's administration was supposed to assess what land or buildings were available for transfer and transfer it out of the possession of the Department of Corrections and into the possession of the Department of Citywide Administrative Services, for them to, in consultation with the Rikers Island Advisory Committee, decide how to start beginning to use it for sustainability purposes. There was one building that was transferred in July. It was underwhelming at best, especially because while control of the building was transferred away from DOC, DOC was still using it for storage. So we weren't very pleased. The second deadline was in August. In August, the Rikers Island Advisory Committee, which was a centerpiece of the law that we had passed, was supposed to be fully appointed and convened. The reason I say it's a centerpiece is that this committee was supposed to be consulted and advise on the specific uses of the island before anything goes into action or implementation. And on this committee must be appointed at least 4 people who have direct experience doing time on Rikers or have had a family member with direct experience doing time on Rikers, and at least 2 people or 3 people, I don't remember, who are environmental justice or sustainability experts. That deadline came and went. We only know of 2 people who are definitely appointed to the committee. We've heard a lot of hearsay. Marco and I were both supposed to be on it. We don't really know where that stands. It certainly has not been convened. So that's a point of political pressure that we're trying to rally people around right now, because it is important for accountability. And then the third deadline was in December. The second deadline, every 6 months, the mayor is required to assess what is available for transfer and make those transfers. And in December, we are pleased to say that in his 2 days before he left office, outgoing Mayor de Blasio transferred 40 acres away from Department of Corrections control to DCAS. And that it's 10% of the island now is out of DOC's control. It's not everything, but 10% is a really good place to start. And we're pretty excited about it.
That was phenomenal. And we're really grateful to have had your presence here today. And not just that, but your passion and all the work that you've been doing through here. Your insistence on, creating this plan that, again, ensures that directly impacted voices are at the table. Being an ally, lending your expertise, but also validating and respecting the importance of lived experiences. So I know everyone's a fan of you right now. I know I sure am. The Environmental Justice Club at Dartmouth, y'all, find her, because this person is really, I have no words, right? They know what they're talking about. And if you connect with what's going on right now with Renewable Rikers and learn about it, then that's, again, a model that can be implemented other places and is so needed And again, I appreciate us really being on the theme of intersectionality, because just talking about the importance of green spaces, right? I think most of us here are New Yorkers. I'm from the Bronx, so I can tell you all about the lack of that where I am. And again, ecological racism, I keep pointing to that. Back with Hunt's point, it has the highest number of people diagnosed with childhood asthma than anywhere else in the city, almost like 4 times the amount of the rest of the city combined. Like, it's just very clear inaccessibility to a clean natural habitat that is impacting community members, right? So it's important for us to create better spaces, not just for those directed by the criminal legal system, but also everyone in New York City benefits in countless ways. So I'm glad that we've been able to have such an expansive conversation today. And I'm really excited by the fact that we have these incredible questions coming in. Again, shout out to everybody in here, also those tuning in from YouTube, as well as in your classroom projector. I hope you have some snacks going on, that you're having a good time. We have a lot of questions to get to, and I would love to get to as many as possible. I'm trying to think of where to start. Let's talk about Eric Adams. No one's favorite person in this space. Somebody asked, what are our thoughts on Eric Adams's early response to the crisis at Rikers? Specifically his decision to move to keep solitary confinement. I know we got a lot of feelings about that, so whoever wants to take the lead, go on ahead.
Yeah, it's like it's kind of similar. Like, I don't know, there's so many things to say about that. It's kind of similar to, you know, when Obama became president. You know, people was like excited about it because the first, you know, president of color, of African descent. But you know, but his administration has some of the same. You would think it was a Ronald Reagan administration, the people he was appointing, you know. So like with Adams, you know, it has been concerning, you know, the lack of urgency, you know, displayed because, you know, people, like, we just had another life loss and haven't heard any response from his administration regarding that. But one thing that he has committed to was closing Rikers Island and moving forward with the borough-based plan. So, you know, there's a saying that even a broken clock is correct twice a day. So he's correct on that, moving forward with the borough-based plan. But it's more that can be done, you know. Like, you know, more can be done with redistributed, you know, resources from this DOC budget and putting it in places where we can tackle the roots of incarceration. More could be done with moving forward with establishing this commission on Renewable Rikers, so we can move forward with, you know, these studies to see what's the best way we can create a Renewable Rikers on the island. And more could be done, you know, to address the current crisis that exists now with decarceration. So, you know, we didn't get here by waiting on elected officials to do something. We got here through advocacy and organizing from the bottom up. And so we have to push and pull and organize in order to get things done. So that's where we at. We don't, you know, we don't rely on elected officials to to do something. We got to organize ourselves and collaborate to make them do something. And you know, it's an old saying: wherever the people go, the suits follow. So we gotta, you know, you just gotta build people power. That's what we have to do to make the people who in power to do what we want them to do.
Eric Adams is definitely. No, go ahead.
I was gonna just say, it's the same way they voted him in, they can vote him out, right? And then when it comes to people's voices, he has to listen to all the voices, not just a selected few, especially those who have stakeholding on a prison complex. You know, one of the platforms he used, obviously, during the pandemic, it was the crime went up. So the fear mongering, obviously, it was easier for him to say, lock them up. We got to be tough on crime. And we've heard that in the past, you know, how many mayors since I've been born, always talking about tough on crime. Has it worked? Obviously not. I mean, we've seen it. We see it now. And I think Darren mentioned it about, you know, what's the root causes of it. One, obviously, is the lack of resources in our community. Re-entry programs, the conditions in jails, in prisons. But some politicians can't think outside the box. And what they do when they get elected, they recycle the same old people that think tough on crimes just to tell him, yeah, we should be tough on crime instead of being more creative, you know, envisioning something else that really works. But our voices do speak. And I always tell people, you know, people say, well, if I vote or if I'm part of it, what difference does it make? Well, it's like a finger. If you have 5 people here, you make a fist, you know, it's much stronger than the finger. That's
Depends which finger, Marco.
Yeah. And also, like you say, Marcos, the same way he was voted in, Eric Adams can be voted out. And like all elected officials. Also, Eric Adams only controls New York City. So he cannot control the legislations that have been passed at the state level. He tried to go to Albany and ask to roll back on bail reform, and he wants to, you know, lock everybody up. He wants to put people in solitary confinement, but he cannot convince legislators in Albany who worked tirelessly so hard to put out and pass legislations towards some criminal justice reform, like bail reform, and he's asking to roll it back. He's just a city mayor. He's not a state official. So he has to listen and abide by the laws and apply them in the courts, because even in New York City court, they still have to abide by the state laws. They have to follow the laws like bail reform. There are many, you know, or discovery, or, you know, these laws are passed at the state level. So he, in the city of New York, he cannot do what he wants, or he can say things or lock them up, put them in solitary confinement. But it would be an uproar if we really push that kind of agenda, because we are not going to allow it. We fight.
And on that note, we have a city council who's quite progressive, quite female, quite diverse. And we have a lot of allies on the council. We always have, but we have a lot now. They need some education, and Freedom Agenda is on it. But the council is really at, you know, the check on the mayor's power here in the city, besides the state. And so we do have the ability, and it's another lesson learned, especially for all of you students, wherever you end up going to live after college, local politics matters. And, you know, from the school board, which someday you'll care about, up to your city council and your mayor, your comptroller, your district attorneys, all of that matters. Pay attention, get involved, get to know people, because who is representing you could be the difference maker in terms of these kinds of policies.
Especially during the budget time. You know, it's frustrating to see every time they talk about the budget, you know, putting some money for the communities, but it's really crumbs they really put in, you know, not enough. And then they'll cut back on education. They'll cut back on what do you call it? Extra activities.
Extracurricular activities.
Yeah, and they always saying, yeah, we want to you know, help the community, but it's crumbs that they throw it at us. And then it's time for us to say, well, our money, our taxpayers' money needs to go to these programs. If you don't do it, then you're out of office. Kick them out.
Thank you for all that. again, I'm sorry, I wish I could answer all these questions for you guys in here, and I'm so happy that you had so many questions come up from this. I think a lot of the questions were kind of answered as we've gone along, and I hope you feel the same way too. If not, definitely keep in touch with Freedom Agenda, and we'll make sure that we continue this education. This is only the start. I'm going to move into another question. That is, how does the campaign to close Rikers fit with bigger plans to close jails across the country? What can we learn from the Rikers campaign? I really like this one.
Can you say that one more time, Grace? I'm sorry.
No worries at all. How does the campaign to close Rikers fit with bigger plans to close jails across the country? And what can we learn from the Rikers campaign?
Well, I think one thing is that, one thing that makes this campaign unique is that Rikers is the last penal colony in the U.S. Like, people probably heard of Alcatraz, which is the island that closed down decades ago. McNeil Island was a penal colony that closed in 2003, I believe, leaving Rikers Island to be the last jail complex, penal colony in the U.S. with 400 acres that has 10 jails on there, that could have 20 jails on there, and so that will make what makes this unique. There's nothing like Rikers Island in the country. So one of the things, like when the campaign first launched, it was basically like the first campaign to close a jail that was like centering people who experience it and their family members who experience, Rikers Island. And I think that's centering the people that's most impacted by the issue is what drove it to the point where we at right now. They say, like in the women's rights movement, if you had men leading it, that wouldn't make sense. The people who's impacted by the issue should be centered in their voices and leading that movement. So, I think any campaign or jail closures, they should definitely, follow that model, center the people impacted by the issue. And yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. There's something else I was going to mention, but folks could weigh in.
I could tell you one story about, pushing the mayor to close it. At one event, Darren went into the mayor's gym. How he got in there, I don't know. But he went in there.
7 a.m. What time was it? 7 a.m.? 7 in the morning.
And the mayor was shocked that someone was showing Close Rikers Island. And you just got to be persistent. You just got to, fight hard for it. Some of the movements have died because people just lose interest, lose hope. Never give up hope. And I'm one of them that can definitely tell you about hope, but in faith. It just never keep fighting. And electing, voting is important. Your vote matters. We get people there that are like-minded, we get some solutions.
Yep.
Awesome. I'm going to put in one more question here that I appreciate, and I hope the students in the room will too. What would you advise both academically, extracurricularly, and career-wise for students with access to the breadth of educational resources at Dartmouth and beyond who are interested in criminal justice reform? So essentially, like, I'm a student right now, I want to do something about it. What do I do? And maybe how can I navigate my career in a way that allows me to do good things for the world?
All right, I'll start just because I already said, get involved in your local elections and find out. I also think that there are so many different ways. I did a slightly more traditional thing, which was studying political science and going to law school. That is not by any means the only way to really make an impact, and probably one of the more restricted ways. I'm doing what I can, and I am not a traditional lawyer by any means. So I don't feel restricted with this notion that the only way to really make a difference in the criminal justice system is to become a lawyer, because that's absolutely not true. Community organizers, advocates are as impactful, if not more impactful, and have a lot more flexibility. going into government and working for government and working for amazing, inspiring elected officials, and then running for office yourself, to be the people who make the change is another way. And like I said, we have really young, inspiring people who were just elected to the city council this year, most of whom are younger than I am. And it is, you know, you can be that person in 5-10 years if you just, you know, really have the energy and make that commitment. If you do want to go to law school and you are interested in it, there are a litany of ways that you can actually be a part of the solution and start making change without necessarily just going into public defense work, which is really valuable and really important. And we need many more committed public defenders. But, you know, doing policy advocacy, and doing impact litigation, which is what I left my environmental justice role after 6 years. And I'm now working for an organization that does national strategic impact litigation, a lot of which does relate to the carceral setting and conditions of confinement. So there are, if you do decide to go to law school, there are a lot of ways, but I would urge you all to look outside of that sort of traditional kind of stereotypical path.
Yeah, I could add, it's like two things come to mind. One, you know, there's this campaign called the Harvard Prison Divestment Campaign. And the students started this campaign because they found out that Harvard, you know, profits over, you know, holdings within the prison industrial complex. So they've been fighting, you know, to get Harvard to, you know, basically detach themselves from these holdings within the prison industrial complex, you know, that's profiting off of, you know, people being detained, etc. So that might be something to look into, you know, at your camp, at your school. And then the other thing is, like, one of the catalysts for me getting engaged in social justice work was, you know, during my incarceration, I had an opportunity to get accepted into a program called the Bar Prison Initiative. And Bar College is a small liberal arts college in upstate New York. They started a higher education program in a few New York State prisons where people could earn their associate's and bachelor's degree. And it was specifically in this one course, U.S. Women's History course, where I learned about the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fires in New York in the early 1900s. And that kind of galvanized young immigrant women who was working in factories to mobilize to change the labor conditions that we benefit from today. And I was like, man, these young teenagers and young 20s immigrant women was able to like organize themselves to change, you know, labor conditions that we benefit from today. Then I could make some change too. So that inspired me to get involved with social justice work. And you know, BPI, the Bar Prison Initiative, you could watch on Netflix is a film about the from the student's perspective. It's a documentary series called College Behind Bars. And you know, we need now that you know, advocates and organizers have passed the restoration of Pell Grants to incarcerated students. You know, colleges could go back and teach, you know, offer a higher education to incarcerated students. And that's something, you know, maybe students could like, you know, advocate for. And BPI, the Bar Prison Initiative, have a consortium with several, you know, colleges and universities across the country to help them develop these programs, you know, with different cities and states. So
you could be also a social worker student, you could be a psychology student, you could be that you don't have to be necessarily in law, in studying law. You could medical studies even are very important in a jail setting, or even in helping in a court, even when somebody is deemed, for example, mentally ill. Even in the court, you need to have psychiatrists or psychologists or people that will direct you know, the person to a better, you know, not to jail, but, you know, to a program. Or yeah, because I've seen people being deemed mentally ill in court during arraignment. So at that point, that's when, you know, you need to steer somebody to a program, not to jail. And so you could be studying any topic and still you can, or environmental studies, still have to be involved with decarceration. It really touches a lot of fields. It's not only law.
Thank you, everyone. So I kind of want to do this and give you space to, you know, kind of share final thoughts in the interest of time, but I'm like so interested to hear from everyone. But maybe we can answer and like, I want to hear your final thoughts, kind of the last things you want to share here. And also if you could put it into one sentence, what would you like to see in a future without jails on Rikers?
For me, a future without jails on Rikers, it looks like a Renewable Rikers that's going to power the city in a clean, sustainable, efficient way, because everybody in the New York City is going to benefit from it.
Did you have any final thoughts? I'm sorry.
Oh no, I would say I also envision a Rikers Island that is no longer even called Rikers Island, because that reminds me of who owned Rikers Island and who was running that infamous island. So I do envision it as a renewable island for New York, renewable energy for an environment in New York. And a lot of the poorer neighborhood will benefit from that a lot, instead of breathing all that pollution every day and smelling all the stench all the time. So it will be great. And I mean, I'm an abolitionist. Technically, I would love to see no jails, a world without jails and without prisons. That's my main goal. But unfortunately, especially in this country, it's going to take a lot to reach that point. And so I am all for Renewable Rikers, and I'm all for smaller retreats near the courts, where people can, workers and people who are detained can be healed and can work in a nice environment and environmentally clean environment as well.
I believe public health is the main I would like to see all around. You know, it ties in with the environmental justice and safety, true safety. If we invest a lot in most of the money in prevention, we'll see people not, you know, get into a crisis. Why wait till a mental health crisis occurs? Why can't we prevent that from occurring? You know, education. I think about like schools actually having time, you know, kids having counselors, more counselors than police in the schools. More education, you know, more libraries, more crisis intervention centers.
A lot of after-school programs. After-school programs are very important as well. Activities after school, so that kids don't go through the streets because they have nothing else.
And more job opportunities for everyone equally. You know, these are things that actually would decarcerate and eventually will achieve, you know, no jails in our cities.
There's nothing really to say that hasn't been said. You know, I think it's interesting as part of our work for the last 6 years in Build Communities and Close Rikers. We do testify in front of city council committees, and I'm always stunned at how many of the committees we decide we're going to submit testimony before, because this issue, this decarceration, criminal justice reform issue, the critical human rights issue of our time, really does touch on education. It touches on youth and culture and development. It touches on health. It touches on mental health, touches on environment. It touches on sanitation. It touches on water. It touches on resiliency. I mean, it really, everything is related. And, you know, a future without jails on Rikers is a more peaceful future, one with less violence, cleaner air and cleaner water, more open space in our overpolluted and overpoliced communities. And I do see the, you know, down the line as to an abolitionist in theory, though in practice right now it's impossible. I do see these borough-based or community-based facilities to be areas that we can turn into other community resources as decarceration and abolition becomes a reality, because they will be newer, modern facilities. And so they, one day, Anna, you maybe can run your wellness retreat out of one of these spaces. And so that is, you know, if we're going into the vision, but let's not act like it's all a dream, because like I said, 6 years ago, when we had this conversation about what to do with Rikers Island, Renewable Rikers was just a dream. And now it's the law. So keep dreaming.
Yes. And I want to throw in there also, we need affordable housing also. That's also another part of decarceration, because a lot of people without housing and they have no place to go, that's where they go, to Rikers Island. They get arrested and go there. So we need affordable housing, education. So you can be a teacher, you can be a yoga teacher, because in these retreats, we need also not just teaching, you know, the subject, school subject, but you can be a yoga teacher or a healer, or, you know, have other ways of healing people and make them feel better and get away from incarceration. Decarcerate and mass incarceration is the product of capitalism. That's what I believe, because it's a money-making machine. It's a big the prison industrial system, right? It's all private, and private companies, they profit off of the jails and the prisons, and that's another big problem that we have to decarcerate, and we have to reduce investments, private investments in the prison systems and jails in the United States, not just in New York.
Absolutely. Wow. Thank you, everybody. Everything was absolutely spot on. Wow. I'm just really grateful that we got this moment to like come together, right? And really flesh this out and really get people to understand the plan, but also maybe address those points that people don't know how to respond to, right? Or things that, you know, information isn't as easily made available. But now people know that Freedom Agenda is out here doing the work. And again, I want to thank everybody here. This was incredible. Even I learned so much, and I hope everyone watching did too. What I asked of everyone is, I said this is the last panel, so I'm not trying to sound like a robot here, but you know, we gave you 2 hours of free political education, and now I have to put you to work, because you can't just hear these stories and, you know, hear about people's experiences and trauma and the hard work that's being done and just kind of sit back. If you want to really join us and be a strong ally, then like, please come on board, reach out to us. But if you can't commit to all of that, you can still be an ally and really help us out. So once again, I'm going to passive aggressively sneak in our interest sign up link here. Again, no commitment. This just means, hey, I'm interested. I want to receive your newsletter. I want to be updated on what's going on, right? You can always unsubscribe if it ends up not being your thing, but I don't think that you will, honestly. I'm also going to go ahead and post Freedom Agenda's links. So like I said before, another really helpful thing that you can do that's like, you know, very easy and accessible is follow us on social media. And when you see those links and updates pop up, share them with people. Start talking about it. You don't need to be an expert on criminal justice reform to like make an impact. And if it feels like this is too much of a monster for us to take down, we have to remember that the carceral system is something man-made. And just like it was built up over generations, we can break it down. We just need everybody's help. If you take on your little piece of destroying this traumatic byproduct of capitalism, of racism, and you take that very seriously as one of your roles and missions and your time on this earth, then we can absolutely get this done. So a little thing that you can do is go ahead and follow us on social media. Like I said, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook as well. I also want to invite our panelists to share their social media too. If you're comfortable with it, whatever you want to do, just to, if you want to keep in touch, if you want to learn about everybody's work, you can follow us as well.